German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has just commented on the passing of the last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Here's what he had to say.
We know that he died at a time when not only democracy has failed in Russia. You cannot describe the current situation there in any other way. But as Russia and Russian President Putin has created fresh divisions in Europe and begun a terrible war against its neighbor, Ukraine. And because of that, we are thinking of Mikhail Gorbachev and know how important he has been for the development of Europe and our country as well in recent years.
Other tributes have been pouring in from leaders around the world. In Russia, a spokesman for Vladimir Putin said the president expressed his deepest condolences to Gorbachev's family. UN Chief Antonio Guterres said he was deeply saddened by Gorbachev's passing and described him as a one-of-a-kind statesman who changed the course of history. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Gorbachev's crucial role in bringing down the Iron Curtain opened the way for a free Europe. And the foundation of then US President Ronald Reagan tweeted that Gorbachev was a man who was once a political adversary, but who ended up becoming a friend. Well, from Riga, our former Moscow bureau chief Yuri Besheto joins us, along with our chief political correspondent Melinda Crane. Melinda, starting with you, for the Germans, this would be clear, but for people abroad, just explain what sort of a role Gorbachev did play in that reunification process between East and West Germany.
Many of the tributes that are now flowing in here in Germany refer to him as one of the architects of unified Germany. He is deeply, deeply revered in this country. And many Germans remember a legendary sentence that he uttered in October 1989, so 1 month before the wall fell, when he said, "If you get there too late, history will punish you." And actually, he's said to have said something slightly more prosaic, that you get into trouble in life if you don't deal with what it throws at you. And in fact, he dealt with what was thrown at him in November 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, with restraint. He kept Soviet troops in their barracks. He later agreed to pull them back out of Germany. In fact, one of my very first reports as a young journalist was on that Soviet troop withdrawal from Eastern Germany. And he mentioned and emphasized restraint in one of the key speeches that he gave in the summer of 1989, when he told the Council of Europe that he had a vision for a Europe whole and free, for a common European house. And, you know, Ben, that's language we still use today to talk about an ideal for Europe that he saw at that time. And he said that can only be based upon restraint and upon political reality. And at the same time, he admitted that, in fact, the winds of history had brought into effect consequences that meant that he still could not fully see the contours of the blueprint for that common European home.
Such a stark contrast to the Russian leadership now. What sort of responses are we getting from Berlin over this news?
Well, you heard Olaf Scholz immediately tying this to the war in Ukraine and talking about Gorbachev as a man of peace. And indeed, the phrases we're hearing from across the entire political spectrum here in Berlin: father of German unity, a man who changed history, a man of peace. Indeed, the absolute opposite of certainly how people here would describe Vladimir Putin.
Yuri, can we bring you in? Russians have a more mixed view of Gorbachev. Tell us more about that.
Well, Mikhail Gorbachev was able to break apart something seemingly unbreakable, a political regime that ruled Soviet Russia for 70 years. So therefore, millions of Russians are thankful to him for it. But at the same time, it took Russia a long, long time to overcome the poverty of the late 80s and early 90s, and many people in that poor Russia came to feel that Gorbachev's reforms, glasnost and perestroika, were not enough to provide them with a dignified life life. A strong economy was also necessary, something that Russia didn't have. So Gorbachev's legacy after the collapse of the Soviet Union is a difficult one. On the one hand, he opened his country and gave the citizens of the Soviet Union freedom and possibilities that they wouldn't have dreamed on before. But on the other hand, people blame him for the difficulties that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union and what many in Russia feel was a national humiliation.
How close was Gorbachev to Vladimir Putin? Could you tell me more about that and where he stood on the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, Mikhail Gorbachev has talked about his support for Russian President Putin many times. He defended Russia's policy in Ukraine. I'm absolutely convinced, he said, that Putin protects Russia's interests better than anyone else. And that is something that the West obviously didn't like to hear from one of the favorite Russian politicians. Gorbachev maintained that the Ukraine crisis provided an excuse for the United States to pick on Russia. But that was all said before the start of the war at the beginning of this year, and we have little information on what Gorbachev's reaction to it really was. Reportedly, he was upset by Putin's invasion of Ukraine. He felt his life's work was being destroyed. All the freedom he once gave to the Russian people with his reforms has now been undone again.
Melinda, you have to say this is so significant. 6 months into this war. And this man, this towering figure in history, in modern history, passes away. What's your personal reaction?
Well, you know, in terms of how would he have thought about the war in Ukraine, it's interesting because if you look at what he said in the years that followed unification, he often cited what he had been told by the U.S. Foreign Minister James Baker at the time when it was clear that Germany would be reunited within NATO, that James Baker said to him, NATO will not move 1 inch closer to Russia. He often cited that, and he talked about his disappointment with the West and also with Germany. He was angry that Russia also often, in his eyes, was scapegoated, and he constantly worried about the potential for violence between Russia and the West. On the other hand, would he himself have resorted to what we have seen Putin do? I think certainly not. It was emphasized in our report that he was a man of disarmament. He signed the first nuclear disarmament treaties. He was under pressure to use military to hold the Soviet Union together, but he always refused to do so and said explicitly to the media, a heavily nuclear-armed country, we are not going to use violence because it could get out of hand. And it's also interesting to note that he was partly Ukrainian. His grandparents were from Crimea. So I think for a whole host of reasons, by the way, he also never served himself in the military, which was quite unusual in Russia at that time. For a host of reasons, I think he never would have resorted to force, as we've seen Putin do.
Yuri, how is Gorbachev regarded in ex-Soviet states like Latvia, for example, where you are?
Well, the relationship between the Baltic countries and Gorbachev is mixed, I would say. On the one hand, Gorbachev enabled the freedom that people enjoy here in Latvia and in other Baltic countries, as well as in the whole post-Soviet bloc. And Gorbachev could, of course, have reacted much more harshly when the Baltic countries declared their independence. On the other hand, there were casualties in the protests here in the 1990s. Lithuania was the first Soviet republic to declare independence. In January 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was General Secretary of the Soviet Union, sent special forces to Vilnius, to the capital of Lithuania, in an effort to reverse this. 14 people were killed and at least 700 people were injured. Lithuanians put up a strong resistance that Gorbachev hadn't counted on. And of course, Gorbachev is also seen as a symbol of the Soviet Union, which is remembered here in the Baltic countries as a time of the Soviet occupation.